Hello everyone, welcome to Stories with Maya Zama. Today I have with me mentor, coach, therapist Effat Yasmin. Thank you. Today we are going to talk about trauma and we are going to focus on birth trauma. A lot of mums who have had cesarean births or vaginal births talk about experiencing very sad, bad, really disappointing birthing experiences. How to recognize if you have birth trauma, how to prevent trauma in people. Maybe care providers will get lots and lots of insights. So anything that occurs within the subconscious stage of your life, which is the first 7 years of life, you are going to register everything inside your body. It is in how it is responded to and how it is registered. Right? So anything that occurs within the subconscious stage of your life, which is the first 7 years of life, you are going to register everything inside your body. Australian Trauma Association quotes that there are close to about 4 to 6% of PTSD events that happen in the general trauma. General trauma. When it comes to birth, it jumps up to 30 to 40%. And I want to do gentle parenting and all. But somehow I'm feeling really angry about life and about postpartum and all was dusted long ago. But still, that 4-year-old or 5-year-old, I'm really angry with that child. That I'll tell you, Swati. My mother gave birth to 4 children, right? And I was the second one. And I was born at home. Now, I don't think my mom saw it as a natural process. So you ask some mothers who have had cesarean sections, they will say, it was a fantastic.
Yeah,
I loved it. A lot of clients like that.
Yeah. As soon as the baby is born, and it's starting from the utero I'm talking about, we have approximately 12 different primitive reflexes in our body.
Right, because a lot of people say don't talk about it now that you have a healthy baby with you, then what is the problem? Why are you always cribbing and complaining about the birth all the time?
Yeah.
So I think in one way or the other, we are here to validate their experiences also.
Yeah. Now recently, just about four days ago, I had a 1-day-old baby in my clinic. And this baby was completely refusing to go to the breast.
Now, considering a woman has given birth some 8 years back, how will she realize if she has, obviously she knows, the most deeper part of her probably knows.
Yeah.
But what are some of the signs and symptoms that later we can identify?
So, to put it, I had a mother who was talking about a compulsive behavior pattern of a child who's all the time lying.
Oh my God.
Right? So she finds fascinating stories about what has not occurred in the life.
Can you let our audience know what is BCST, biodynamic craniosacral therapy, and how it can help for trauma resolution? Hello everyone, welcome to Stories with Maya Zama. Today we are going to talk about trauma and we are going to focus on birth trauma. A lot of mums who have had cesarean births or vaginal births talk about experiencing very sad, bad, really disappointing birthing experiences. Today we are going to deep dive into this subject and understand how this happens, how to recognize if you have birth trauma, how to prevent trauma in people. Maybe care providers will get lots and lots of insights. And we'll talk about biodynamic craniosacral therapy. All this is from one of my favorite mentors, therapists, professionals in this field, Effat Yasmin. And the conversation was a bomb conversation. I recommend you to watch the whole thing. We have deep dived into all of these topics. And ma'am is an international board certified lactation consultant, a biodynamic craniosacral therapy practitioner, BCST practitioner. And she's also into flower therapy, flower medicine. It's very interesting to meet these kind of people and learn a lot from them because once in a while I want to introduce these kind of varied professionals to all of you. Watch the whole conversation and let me know in the comments what you felt. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That will motivate me in bringing more unique professionals and interesting concepts and topics that are not widely spoken about in the Indian content scene. I really love the conversation. I'm sure you'll love it too. Please watch and let me know. Thank you. Hello everyone, welcome to Stories with Maya Zama. Today I have with me mentor, coach, therapist, Effat Yasmin. Thank you. Ma'am, thank you so much for being on my channel, on my podcast. I'm very happy that you're here.
I mean, I feel like it's a privilege and it's absolutely my pleasure to be here and chat with you today.
So whatever I've learned about lactation, birth, postpartum, mental health, different modalities of therapies, so many things is connected to ma'am and the work that she does. So today I have chosen one important topic to discuss with ma'am. It's birth trauma. Birth trauma, ma'am, it's not usually discussed on the Indian content scene. We don't see much content on it.
Yeah.
I chose it because everybody who calls themselves a mother through cesarean, vaginal birth, will have stories about the birth. Definitely. Whatever kind of birth you go through, you'll have stories, and a lot of them have very sad, upsetting, distressing stories also.
Right.
And as lactation professionals, we get to see them firsthand.
Yeah.
We are the people with whom they start sharing these stories and start crying before even talking about their lactation issues.
Right.
So, as a lactation consultant, as an IBCLC, who's been in this field for many, many, many years, you would have heard of so many such stories. And you're also helping women heal their traumas, their birth traumas through several therapies that you do.
Yes.
Be it BCST, be it the flower remedies, through so many other modalities, you're helping them. But before we get into birth trauma, ma'am, the word trauma is definitely overused these days, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Whichever page you see, even randomly people are using it. Like, I watched a movie and it was traumatizing. That's the way people are using trauma.
Right.
From your words, we want to hear what is trauma.
Right. Like you said, I think it's as information flows, Swati, people get exposed to a lot of social media. So they get a lot of terminology into their livelihood, daily life.
Yeah.
And so everything that's thrown around becomes a part of who you are. Right? So I think it's important from a clinical perspective to understand what's the difference between an event that occurs in your life normally vis-a-vis something that can be traumatic. So that this difference then allows you not to see loss of hope in life, because trauma can lead to a lot of other repercussions and causes. Right? So we have to be careful about how we define that. What then defines that, right? So normally if you look at trauma, they would either categorize in injury, accident, which can be concussion or a car accident or motor accidents. These are things that are normally considered to be trauma, right? That's why you have in hospitals a trauma unit, trauma care, trauma unit. So this is how it's normally understood as. But if you look from a psychological perspective, there is also trauma that comes from emotional responses to or events that have occurred in life.
Okay.
Now, usually how is that dealt with? Either with counseling. Most of the time it is with counseling and long-term counseling that goes on with it. Then came Peter Levin, who has done some seminal work in this field. When I say seminal, what I mean is he has explored areas of trauma that many of them did not look at, which means most of them looked at it from a psychological perspective, right? Trauma that's come out of soldiers who have gone into war zone, for example, who could have severe episodes of PTSD, which could be post-traumatic stress disorder. Will they have flashbacks? Those kind of events. So these are considered to be highly traumatic events that have occurred in life. Now, what Peter Levin did is he started to look at saying, is it only at a psychological level, or is there a response of physiology happening there? Physiology means, does the body respond differently as well?
Okay.
So where is it registered? It's a pursuit of truth, looking at where the evidence lies, right? So he wrote a fantastic book after he did his seminal work, research work, and he came out with a book called Waking the Tiger. Now that's a book that if you're a trauma-informed caregiver, whether it is a medical professional or therapeutic level people or anyone who is in the field of counseling, I think absolutely is a must to read.
Okay.
Waking the Tiger. Now, what did he do in that exploration is to look at what happens to the event when it occurs and how does it get registered in the body,
Okay.
right? So, he then concludes in that work that trauma is not in the event itself. It is in how it is responded to and how it is registered, right? So, anything that occurs within the subconscious stage of your life, which is the first 7 years of life, you are going to register everything inside your body because you're open to being programmed. That's a subconscious programming, which is an open programming default mode.
Right.
You're at a default mode at that time. So that could include in utero, which is like you're in the womb of the mother, you're in the labor, birth, post-birth, and the growing years, toddlerhood, including the first few years of your
Preschool.
childhood, preschool and till about 7 years, right? Which is when your cognitive sense starts to begin, and then you start to relate things to outside of just being programmed, right? So you're absorbing, you're in the stage of being programmed and absorbed. That is the stage that he says is one of the stages. Can this programming happen at a later stage also? Yes, it can happen, especially when you are faced with an event that comes too fast, too quick to process.
Okay.
Right? So, you are taken by surprise, such as if an animal comes in front of you.
Okay.
Which is why he names his book Waking the Tiger. So, every time you faced a tiger, your body is going to respond in a different way because there's a survival mechanism that is built into the system, that is especially the limbic brain system, which we will talk in detail about. So, you're going to respond in that way, right? Now, what he says is that this can happen when things happen too quickly or you're not prepared for something. That's a very important part which I want to underline. Which
Not prepared for.
Not prepared for. If you're not prepared for. Does it also then give us a hope that if you're prepared for certain events, you're going to reduce the likelihood of trauma, which I think becomes very crucial for caregivers. For us to think about that as an aspect. So, anything taken by surprise, you're going to not have time to process it. It's been too fast and no time to process and something else is happening or you're going undercover. Like you're just letting it just slip through under the carpet and not addressing it, right? So, these events then become a traumatic event. So, then what he does is outside of this understanding, he builds a framework of how to work with that.
Okay.
Besides just counseling, right? Now, how many of us can actually relive those events of trauma at a cognitive level when you're being counseled? I think it's, we got to look at it from a very sensitive point to see if you have to relive the event, if I have to process the event of a rape, if I have to process an event of a surgery, if I have to process an event of a physical accident, for example, or something extremely traumatic that has occurred from an emotional point of view, including loss of some loved ones. So, all of these events, how many of us can go back to it and process it at a cognitive level? And how quick can you do that? So, then what he does is he starts to give grounding framework, grounding exercises and working from the body up to the mind.
Right.
That's his seminal work, right? So, it changed the scenario of looking at trauma itself. The course of understanding about trauma itself changed after Peter Levin's work got, spread out and it started to get adopted, integrated into various different modalities. I think it's a phenomenal work that allows us to then have hope that you can work with it without having to engage at a very cognitive level.
Right.
It is very difficult, like I said, like you can't go back to it. You have to talk, like you just mentioned in the beginning, that if somebody's had a birth which is traumatic and lactation consultants or counselors are meeting them for the first time, now even before they can begin even talking about it, they're already going into that state. Just debriefing stage. Now, two things you have to look from that perspective. Slowly I'm moving into understanding a little bit about birth trauma. We'll go deeper into that. But just to touch upon this aspect, that how many of us as caregivers are even prepared to understand how to hold space for someone debriefing their experiences, right? Because it is a difficult event and somebody needs processing. And if I am not informed about how to actually allow that processing to occur and how to guide the process,
Okay.
then it is only going to trigger responses from my own physiology, right? So my own survival mechanisms are going to get awakened when I'm listening to someone else's story. So rather than being a co-regulator, I'm already going to be another trigger point for me to get triggered off with my own processes that can come up.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is how these things can be understood, that it's important that we are all trauma informed.
Okay.
And if you generally talk about it from an experiential point of view, most women today, because of the reasons that we will just discuss, is if I talk about birth, they will say, most of them, I'm talking when I used to go as a young mother to my daughter's school.
Okay.
We are all there as young mothers, preschool children. I'm talking many years ago, right? They'll say, why do you want to talk about birth? That's all done and gone. We don't want to talk about it. So, no, they know that it's important in life. We are all going to go through the passage of life of birth, for having family and wanting children. But nobody wants to go there because they don't know another way to have it. They feel this is the only passage of life that it's going to be traumatic in life. I have to deal with it. That's all.
Okay.
It's a passage of life that we all have taken it for granted and it is almost normalized. Why do we say it's normalized? Because you can see that the amount of interventions that we do throughout for any physiological process has become extremely high today. So we have normalized it.
Okay.
So people feel like this is how it's going to be. So nobody wants to open that window, even listen to it and process it. And as women, I'm telling you that it's an intimate process of birth and you will remember it throughout your lifetime till you're in your deathbed. You're not going to forget it. These are some events that are passage of life that you will always remember.
Yeah.
So it's really that important, right?
Yeah.
So that's where it is. And generally, if you see PTSD, like I told you, the incidents that we see in the studies today, for example, Australian Trauma Association quotes that there are close to about 4 to 6% of PTSD events that happen in the general trauma.
Okay.
General trauma. When it comes to birth, it jumps up to 30 to 40%.
Oh, okay.
So it's really high number.
Okay.
And it is not normal incidence to have anything that's normal category will be somewhere around 3 to 4%. Normally that's what you see. But anything jumping over that, it really needs to make us sit up and listen to what's going on. Which is, I think, which I feel it's like phenomenal that you're actually picking up this topic because not everybody wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
And not everybody has the understanding about talking about it. Not everybody have dealt with it from an educational point of view.
Right.
That's what I wanted to touch upon.
Yeah. So, ma'am, you beautifully described trauma. I think to some extent, at least people who are doing that inner work would understand, okay, my system, my nervous system is probably dysregulated, or I'm having these heightened feelings, or some understanding is there about, okay, this may be trauma, this incident happened to me, that would have been. But can birthing experience also cause trauma is something surprising to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Internally, maybe they know, okay, it's only after this incident that my life has changed, or it has changed for the worse, or something bad has been happening ever since.
Or I can't understand what is happening.
What has happened, yeah.
Even that.
Especially a lot of mothers and all that say that, I want to do gentle parenting and all, but somehow I'm feeling really angry about life and about postpartum and all was done, dusted long ago, but still that 4-year-old or 5-year-old, I'm really angry with that child all the time. I'm always jittery. So they know it is something related to the birth, but has it traumatized them is a surprising fact for a lot of people. Yeah. So can you please elaborate on birth trauma itself? What is birth trauma? What happens during birth that causes this trauma?
I think it's a sensitive topic.
Yeah, it is.
It can bring up a lot of things to a lot of people and who's listeners with us today. So I think we have to be mindful and be prepared to go through our own journeys sometimes, and it can be triggering. So we'll talk about it anyways. So birthing is a physiological process, like we all know.
Yeah.
It's a part of the passage of life, and we all want to have families and we want to have babies and they bring joy to us. And then the part of that is carrying that baby in the womb through the 9 months and then going through a process of labor to have birth. Right?
Yeah.
And this is a normal process. When the normal process, how do you see normal process? It's a part of life, which means that if it's a part of life, you always have people who care for you around you. That's the first thing that symbolizes us to be normal. Like I live with my family, I eat with my family, I sleep in the same house in the family. So the people who eat together stay together. They say that, right? So what does it mean? If you have a normal event happening, you have people who care for you, who mean well for you, who take care of you, and that process is like a mother taking care of the child.
Okay.
That's how normalization occurs. Now, if I am isolating that event, a physiological event, away from a social setup, which is your own home, your own family, or the neighborhood, or women who care, if I take that out and put that into an institutional place,
Okay.
that's the first place that you can start to move away from what is normal.
Okay.
Does not mean that everything that's going to happen in that institute is going to be categorized as trauma.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
But we have to know that we have already primed and there's a risk factor now. We have added a risk factor. There's a risk factor to it. Now, how I handle that event in an isolated place then becomes the second factor. So if I've added a bit of risk, can I introduce that same ecosystem into the same place that you are in? If I can't, then there are additional risk factors that you add from a social engagement perspective, relational field, which I called.
Right.
The relational field changes.
Right.
Then comes the intervention. Interventions such as medications, starting even from pregnancy, I would say, hormone regulators, or progesterone injections, especially for people who have fertility issues. And then starting out of labor, giving Pitocin, for example. So all these are medications that are given, pharmaceutical products that are entering into the body. And very few times do we understand that the medications not only are biochemical in nature, which interact with your biochemistry, but also interact with your neurotransmission, which we normally don't talk about that.
Right.
It is also intervening and altering the neurotransmission inside your body, which means how you feel about certain things will also change. Right? Because how we feel about happiness, sadness, everything has a relationship with neurotransmitters, right? If that's getting intervened, then you're going to feel different about it as well. So there is also neurotransmitter intervention happening, physiological transmission happening, then there is also physical interventions that are being done. So then you can see the amount of heightened interventions that are being added one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. Then that event can become less and less normal. Less and less normal.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if I continue to use an induction, for example, then possibly I'm altering how the physiological process of contractions is going to occur. Either it can speed up the process or it can extremely slow down the process. So the rhythms in the body will change. The rhythms in the body change. Now, I am trying to be connected as an interoception, which is a little bit of a word. I will talk about it if you want me to elaborate that. But the sense of my own physical body and the physiological processes that are happening in my body already are heightened in my labor process, right? Now, whether I was connected with my physical body or not, during birth, you don't have a choice but to be in tune with it.
Yeah.
I am going to feel it. It's going to happen. Now, if it is altering, I don't know how to pace myself.
Yeah.
Right? So, if I don't know how to pace myself, remember what Peter Levin said, that things can happen by surprise. Too fast, too quick, too little time to process. So, then that is what is happening during this unphysiological process, if I can call that.
Right.
It's an unphysiological process.
Yeah.
Then you are going to register trauma because of this fastness. Now, can I change that? Yes, with preparedness, you can change that.
Yeah.
You can still have the intervention,
Mm.
but you can also prepare.
Mm. Mm.
If you prepare, then you're not taken by surprise. You can reduce it.
Right.
Which one of the journals of the UK journal, International Journal of Obstetrician, in fact, they are quoting in one of the surveys that they have done that if you give them support during the birthing process,
Mm.
either with doula support or
Mm.
midwifery support, which anyways we talk a lot about,
Mm.
the amount of PTSD events,
Mm.
post-traumatic stress disorder,
Mm.
or postpartum depression,
Mm.
all of this reduces over 50%.
Mm. Okay.
Just by supporting this process,
Okay.
you can reduce that event by almost 50%. This is like studied. It's
Yeah.
studied, and we have the references that we can pull out from, right? So this is what I'm talking about. It is one is about what happens in that process.
Mm.
Second is how can we actually alter that system through our own preparedness.
Ma'am, before getting into details on what all causes birth trauma or how a person can understand whether they have birth trauma in them, a little positive way of looking at it we can approach, I feel. I thought I'll ask you, how does a good birth or how does a good outcome feel like? Because a lot of women, especially in lactation counseling sessions, when I sit with them, they start with their birth story, they cry. In the beginning and all, I used to cry. Then I realized that I have to regulate myself. It was my journey also during this process. And after that, after they explain, after they tell their story, then they are able to think of the breastfeeding issue and other things. But it's very rarely that I have spoken to women that tell me that it was a beautiful experience, wonderful experience. I felt so good. I felt so supported, all of that. So if you can give that perspective, because in your practice also you would have seen some women who say,
Absolutely.
how do they feel after?
Yeah, so I think it's a beautiful process. One of it is that it is a passage of life for women, and this is something that we must experience and associate it with good outcome, right?
Yeah.
We all owe it. I really feel that, Swati. I feel like as professionals, care providers, we all must take 1,000 steps if we can bring that experience into a woman's life.
Yeah.
Any step that's taken towards it, it never goes waste. So even the smallest of the act that you do in a hospital setup or in a home setup, wherever that you are in, woman can make a big change in difference between how the woman saw her birth versus how she didn't see that, right? So I think women, no matter where they birth, I think this is very important that you don't start to associate trauma with a particular place. I think it's about the experience. Now, why do I say that? I'll tell you, Swati. My mother gave birth to 4 children, right? And I was the second one. And I was born at home. Okay?
Okay.
Now, when you think about it, you say, oh, that must have been a great experience for her because that's what we want. We want home births. We want them to be with their family. All of that, right? Now, I don't think my mom saw it as a natural process. Why? Because at that point, this was approximately 50 years ago, right? So we had already started to have events where women were asked to come to the hospital as an institutional birth, as a process. So that's the information that's going on to women, that it's safer for you to birth in the hospital. So come to the hospital when you're birthing. All of those things would have happened, right? So that gets registered into our minds that this is better. Something like somebody says formula is better for a baby. Everybody will want to go for that.
Yeah.
Correct? That is how it started.
Which a whole generation did.
It's a whole generation you saw that many people want. Not because they knew it was bad. They actually gave it because it was good. So something like that would have got registered with it. Now, a woman who feels that my safe birth is going to happen in a hospital, I have not been taken there because I'm in the process of labor and I don't have access to get there. Now my birth has to happen here. How it's going to be, I don't know. So it's the sense of safety.
It's not the place.
It's not the place. So it's a sense of safety. So possibly the way she experienced it would have been more violent than otherwise.
Right.
So that's why it becomes important for us to know what is the sense of safety
Mm.
that a woman feels, which will support her. That as birth workers, I think it might come as a bit of a surprise because here they are out to sell the idea that natural birth is the best way to go. Just physiological birth, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But what does a woman feel that will actually support her is a question that we must ask as birth workers.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you feel supported? What will support you at this given point of time?
Right.
This happens many times even after birth during lactation time, right?
Mm.
Now, if I ask her, you breastfeed the baby 8 times, 8 to 10 times, this is normal. If you feel like you don't have enough milk, maybe you should pump for 6 times a day. It is overwhelming for a woman to do that because we don't know her setup, her life and other interactions that she has, social interactions, right? Now, sometimes I've had to stop and say, okay, these are the recommendations that I can see which will be supportive in your goal to restore. But what feels support for you? Can you tell me? Then she'll say, I don't think I can do that. Can I just breastfeed like 4 times a day? I don't think I can manage it because I have 2 other children to take care. So it has to be contextualized.
Yeah.
Swati.
Yeah.
So what feels support for each one can be different. While it is a place for us to educate them of what is more closer to the truth, we also need to be wise about supporting them what feels to them to be a supportive birth.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So if I have a supportive environment, whether it is at home, whether it's in the hospital, whether it is in a facility, it does not matter. As long as she has the support that defines to her as support, you can have a beautiful birth. And this should help a lot of women who felt the support in the hospital and thought that because it was a hospital birth, maybe I have trauma. It for them to recognize, oh, no, this was not traumatic. My experience was different. So you ask some others who have had cesarean sections, they will say, it was a fantastic.
I loved it. A lot of clients like that. Yeah.
That is different from what the body is registering. Now, that part I'm not going into, but I'm talking from a mental perspective. So she finds it to be a supportive part. So that's important for us to keep in view of how we define. We don't want to introduce the idea that you're traumatized when those symptoms and the signs are not showing up.
Okay. Yeah.
Just because something has happened that I consider it to be a classic case of a blueprint of a traumatic birth, right? So women who have experienced supported birth feel aesthetic, they feel joyful, they enjoy the process, they feel in tune with their inner sense, and they go into their, they feel very, what would I say, they move from outside to inside very deeply during very active labor. And that's a phenomenal experience to have.
Right.
Women who have been pregnant will understand that the first time you felt your baby move inside your womb feels like a very different experience, right? You would have never experienced that when you don't have that experience in life.
Can't compare it with any.
Cannot compare it with anything else. So similarly, a birthing process that's happening, labor process happening, they actually enjoy that process. They feel like the body has been given some space to explore itself. They also feel a sense of joy, they feel the sense of intimacy with people around them, the way they connect with others. There are pathways of empathy that opens up for women who are going through happy birthing experiences. They connect with people in a different way because their pathways in the body, the sensory pathways in the body open up. It's a huge phenomenal process, like expansion of the entire pelvic area, softening of the tissues in the body. So everything is opening up, expanding, creating space. All of these open many, many pathways, Swati. So that's why this experience can be very empowering for women, very enjoyable for women. And sometimes they experience almost aesthetic. Like, it's like euphoria, like sort of an euphoric kind of birth. You can see women who have had, they're beyond happiness, that the experience of a high. And at that point, there are a lot of neurotransmitters that are actually pushing that neurotransmission inside the body, making us feel that sense of high that you'll feel perhaps, when you have sort of substance abuse, for example. But this is real high.
Yeah.
They really feel that high.
Mm.
And that high, actually, what does it do? It allows us to bond with our babies.
Mm.
After going through an intense process in the womb and the labor process, right after that, the mother is fully awakened in her senses to take her baby and actually protect that baby at that point.
Right.
It is such a beautiful process,
Yeah.
both from a spiritual perspective, both from physical perspective, mental perspective, emotional perspective. If it's all aligned well, it does not matter where it is. And I think it's the support that they consider as support is given to them. It can be a very beautiful experience in life.
Right. I think that was imperative that people heard that angle, because a lot of women have not got the privilege of going through such births, no? And we are actually speaking on behalf of them also, because a lot of people want to feel validated, want to feel heard, want to feel, oh my God, if somebody tells me that this is what I went through, and it is a valid feeling that I went through, because a lot of people, they are scared to talk about it.
Yeah.
They're scared, thinking, okay, how do I talk about something that gave me a healthy baby?
Yeah.
Right, because a lot of people say, don't talk about it. Now that you have a healthy baby with you, then what is the problem? Why are you always cribbing and complaining about the birth all the time?
Yeah.
So I think in one way or the other, we are here to validate their experiences also.
Yeah.
Now, from those beautiful experiences, ma'am, if we are again coming back to a traumatic birth experience, like for example, for me, the world opened with lactation practice,
Right.
where I started seeing all these different stories, hearing all these different experiences, and it really opened me up. And it is very distressing when you hear, ma'am, this happened, ma'am, they did this to me, I wanted this but something else happened, or I felt disrespected, or a certain intervention I didn't want to, but then I was coaxed into it, I was coerced into it. But during that time they asked me if I want to do it. How will I say no during that time, ma'am? So I said yes, and now I regret it, ma'am. Or I attended a childbirth education class and the educator told me that I could say no to certain things or I could deny certain things, but there in that scenario I couldn't do anything. I was pushed into it, this, that, then it's a lot to take in sometimes. So from your experiences, can you share with us some case studies or references that indicate this is how it happens, or these are some of the reasons why birth trauma happens?
Right. So like you've heard before, and I say it again, and very different platforms have said it. Now, in the last 14 plus years of practice, I still don't have a mother, despite all the information that's out there. I still don't have a mother who walks to the clinic and who thinks that there is any connection between my experience of birth to what happens after.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Like, we are normally people who can make sense of a lot of things, and we feel that. But they are always surprised that, oh, did this impact this?
Yeah.
Is that possible? So somehow the sense of continuum is missing. The link is missing. Somehow they feel like they're two different events, like birth, pregnancy, and postpartum. They're like 2-3 different separate events of life, and they don't really have any link or connection at all. So even today, this is the story actually. So no matter how much information we are putting out there, there is no link of understanding. There is nobody who walks and says, yeah, I know this has happened to me, right? Now, you are asking me, what will it look like for a mother if she's had an experience? How will it actually show up
as trauma?
As trauma, right? Now, because I'm a lactation consultant, I'm going to give you a case study related with that issue, because that's when they've come, right?
Okay.
So a mother who says that, oh no, my baby is not able to feed and the baby is refusing to attach at the breast. What do I do, ma'am? Baby cries all the time.
Okay.
Right? Now, this is the scenario she says. Now, if you ask her, how do you feel about the scenario? She will say, I think I have less milk. This is like a classic case of most palilla. So this is what it is. 80% of the cases will take exactly, this is how it opens up the conversation. Now, when you see the interaction that's happening between the mother and baby, you're starting to uncover and unpack various signs that I start to see where things are coming from. Right? So as soon as the baby is being taken from another hand or maybe the bed to the mother, the first thing the baby is doing is a vehement refusal cry. Right? Now, that's a classic sign that you need to see, that the nervous system
Mm.
has gone through something too quick, too fast, right?
For which it
For
couldn't
it,
prepare
it couldn't
itself.
prepare itself. So that's the first sign we need to see. Why do I have to say that?
Mm.
Because every baby naturally, physiologically, I'm not saying natural birth, I'm saying naturally and physiologically are primed to move towards the mother's breast and feed.
Mm.
That's their
Carnal-
default mode.
Yeah.
That's their default mode. They are
Yeah.
primed to do that. They are built to do that. That is what their competency is. They are already born with that competency. They don't have to learn it. They already have it, right? And there are reflexes that are built in them that actually moves them to be able to feed.
Yeah.
Now, if that's not happening, this is from a baby perspective.
Mm. Mm.
Right?
Mm.
Now, that's one of the things.
Mm.
Refusal, crying, or shutting down completely, which I'll talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
Because people think baby is sleepy at the breast,
Mm.
right? Many of the times when I notice that, that's not sleeping. Like you're winding down to sleep after being fed is sleep.
Mm.
But a baby who is crying at a high pitch
Mm.
and suddenly quietens down and goes to sleep is called a shutdown process.
Mm.
That's not a sleepy baby.
Right.
And people need to understand this, because then they'll wait because baby is now slept. Now what do? I
Mm.
try to wake the baby, and during that time when the baby shut down,
Mm.
no matter what you do, Swati, then baby will not wake up, because they have gone into a reserve state. They've gone to process it. Remember, things have done too much. Now I don't know what to process. They've shut down. They've gone into that state. They've gone to the processing.
Mm.
Because the cognitive consciousness has to shut down completely
Mm.
to go into the reserve to do any processing out there,
Mm.
and then come out again, say, okay, now I have some resources to deal with what's happening.
Mm.
Again, I shut down, because it repeats and repeats and repeats. And the fact is, if you don't recognize it,
Mm.
you are systemizing that entire trauma cycle again and again and again.
Mm.
Then what happens is, it becomes a personal issue where the baby is refusing at the mother's breast.
Mm.
The mother starts to feel, my baby is rejecting me.
Yeah. Mm.
And that can become very, emotionally very,
Yeah.
very saddening for a mother,
Mm.
right? So, and then she sees that the baby calms down the minute the baby is picked up by the mother's
Grandma.
mother, grandmother, or maybe someone else, or even nanny for that matter. Someone who's like a massage person has come home, and she is able to pick up the baby, and the baby is absolutely fine. So these are signs that you need to look for.
Right.
Refusal to feed,
Mm.
crying too much,
Mm.
shutting down and
Mm.
sleeping away,
Mm.
or holding the breath,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And then they can't release that. They don't know how to stop. So that's happening.
Mm.
Or they are refluxing too
Mm.
much. They're just vomiting,
Arching and-
back arching, that's happening. All of these events that are occurring, these are babies who are definitely having signs of trauma.
Mm.
Now
Mm.
come to the mother.
Mm.
What is she doing at that point? So when she's trying to position the baby,
Mm.
when you see the signs here, the first thing you look at is whether she's actually intuitively using her body,
Mm.
because the baby and the mother have to dynamically adjust their bodies in a way that allows that union to happen.
Mm.
It is a part of love making,
Yeah.
right? It's a process of love making between the mother and baby at the breast. It's like she's feeding at her bosom. So it's a very beautiful, intimate process. So there is a process of dance that come in. Almost like in sex, you will talk about foreplay,
Yeah.
right? It's
Mm.
almost like that.
Mm.
There is that connection that's coming in.
Mm.
They interact with each other. So there is this eye contact that the baby makes, and the baby moves towards it.
Mm.
Baby looks for the breast,
Yeah.
has rooting reflex, which
Yeah.
means I'm seeking for connection. So all of these things are occurring.
Mm.
When these things are missing, the mother intuitively needs to use her body to entice the baby to come to her breast, and she can't do it. She starts to use her mind. Oh, this is the position to feed the baby.
Vikalama.
So she's getting very cognitive now, because now she's learning, okay, maybe you should do cross cradle hold, maybe you should do cradle hold, maybe football hold, maybe you should do a different hold.
Mm.
So it's very technical, right?
Mm.
These are technical. So you're using your mind to do all that.
Mm.
You're actually not moving with intuition in the body.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why does it happen? It's happening because she's not able to process something.
Mm. Mm.
Now I'm looking for outside help,
Yeah.
because I can't understand this and I'm not able to use my body intuitively.
Right.
The same thing of a mother who has had a physiological birth
Mm.
with a supported, safe environment
Mm.
behaves differently, Swati.
Mm.
I'm talking about a baby who's refusing to feed, right? A baby who refuses. Now, recently, just about four days ago, I had a 1-day-old baby in my clinic, and this baby was completely refusing to go to the breast. This mother was in a loving environment. She had a beautiful birth. It was a home birth. Everything was taken care of. And for her, it was almost an euphoric kind of happy scenario. But this baby refuses, right? Now, when I see that mother interacting, she moves intuitively. She needs external help, but she moves intuitively. She knows how to take the baby and embrace the baby and position the baby with her embracing hands.
Okay.
Now, often when mothers are traumatized during birthing process, when you try to position the baby in a certain way, their hands will not move, Swati. They'll possibly sit like that.
நம்ம கொண்டு போய் வச்சு கொடுக்கணுங்கிற மாதிரி
Exactly.
நீங்க
The nurse they will be attaching to the breast, all that.
shoving.
And the mother is not involved at all.
Yeah.
The mother is like sitting like that normally. So when that is happening, you have to recognize that she has registered trauma in her body. So we need to look at that. Why is she not able to intuitively
Like, use her body.
Yes. And then what happens is when the baby is crying, she gets hyper alert about that. The protective instinct starts to come inside. Can I do something? Can I do something? She goes red in her face. Her ears go red. This is the sign that is showing all her nervous system completely dysregulated. And these are signs that you need to look for. Her breath becomes shallow. She starts to breathe very heavy. And then she's rapidly moving her hands. You've seen these mothers who can't make an eye contact with you anymore, who are constantly moving and looking for, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? This is how she moves around. Right? She's not able to understand what to do about it. She feels helpless. These are signs of trauma. This is how it shows up during the breastfeeding time. And when it fails again, because she's responding that way, baby's again responding that way. Because the baby's nervous system's response comes from the mother. There is a resonance between mother and baby. So if the mother's registering that, the baby also starts to register. Now, two scenarios, right? One is the mother is traumatized, baby is okay. A baby is traumatized, mother is okay. Or if both of them have gone through it. Then one is feeding into the other. It's like the codependent environment gets created. And they are constantly feeding into each other the same agitated nervous system. So they cannot interact with that. Those are the more difficult cases.
Right.
So I look at these as scenarios. So there was this mother who feels like she's doing something wrong if she continues to breastfeed the baby. This baby is refusing.
Okay.
So why should I put my baby through this? Now, because my mother is telling so or my husband is telling so. Nowadays, that is also happening. Everybody is getting educated about the better things about feeding. Mother feeding is a good option. So everybody wants that. So nowadays, men are also getting educated and they put pressures on their wives that this is how it should be. There's no other scenario. What they are going through, sometimes they don't understand that, right? So they feel pressured about it. And then they feel like, I don't know what to do. Why should I put my baby through so much of trauma? They feel that is traumatic. Trying to get this baby to the breast itself is traumatic for them.
Yeah.
So they feel like, why should I put my baby through that? My baby should be fed, na? So let me just feed the baby and that will be done. So these are signs that you need to look for. That they are feeling helpless. They are feeling agitated, they are feeling anxious, and you will see that in their body language. You will see that in the lack of connection, and they are heightened in their shoulders, especially. There's too much of tone on their shoulders, they'll be raised up, and their necks are very tight, So all of these are great signs for you to look for if you want to understand how the mother is actually feeling. So can I facilitate the regulation for the mother, so that I can use that regulation for the baby and then support the baby and bring them both to a place which is settling. So this is what is coming from the birth.
Okay.
Right? If she was not given a space where she can express her body movements during birth, where she can walk, where she can squat, or whether she can lie down, or whether she needs to have a shower, or she wants to just move or she wants to kind of ground sometimes, or
Mm.
she wants to scream sometimes, or she wants someone to give a back massage, or she wants someone to embrace her, she wants someone to hold her. All these things, when they are short circuited, Swati,
Mm.
then how are you going to cope with what is anyways occurring? If you're tied down, you're lying down. You're tied down how? Because of the monitors. There are so many monitors that have been put. Fetal monitoring is done. Sometimes it's required. Sometimes it is just added. So let us take both the scenarios.
Mm.
That sometimes interventions are needed.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's not needed. Maybe that was used, overused. But even in cases that has needed to be used,
Mm.
is there enough preparation?
Mm.
Is there consent?
Right.
Is
Right.
that invitation given to them for them to become prepared for it?
Mm. Mm.
All these things become very important, which
Mm.
is why my approach to therapy,
Mm.
even post events
Mm.
or pre events.
Mm.
Now, why do I say post and pre? Because I do facilitate babies for going through a procedure called a frenotomy, which is a tongue tie procedure,
Right.
which is a separate topic of its own, but it's
Mm.
a surgical process,
Mm.
right? So, how do you support pre procedure?
Mm.
How do you support if an event has already occurred?
Mm.
No, both are important for us to look at,
Right.
which I have, I've been, because I also look at birth trauma, especially from the modality that I use, which is BCST,
Mm.
biodynamic craniocerebral therapy. And I also look from a cognitive perspective, psychological perspective, mental health perspective, life events perspective, relational field perspective, from all of these angles.
Mm.
What I have seen is what we need to, and then also we have to dip into what research tells us, right?
Mm.
So I love Peter Levin's work.
Mm.
So that he's talking from a normal trauma perspective, right?
Mm.
How do you integrate that into our system,
Mm.
into the field that I am working in, right? So what I did is I've devised a method
Mm.
to approach the body
Mm.
from inside out,
Right.
which I call sense.
Mm.
What does sense means? First, I have to look at the sensory regulation,
Mm.
which is a hindbrain, which is basically the innermost part of your brain, which is called the reptilian brain.
Mm.
So I need to settle that down,
Mm.
give a sense of safety to that.
Mm.
Now, this is before events.
Okay.
One is to, how do I prepare somebody, you're saying, right?
Mm.
How do I prepare if I have to have an intervention?
Mm.
So first is to make sure that the person feels safe
Mm.
at a sensorial level,
Mm.
right? The second is for me to see the emotional regulation
Mm.
part of it,
Okay.
where I need to see if do they have heightened emotions? Are they already showing me signs that make me feel like they're anxious already?
Mm.
I have to look at all that
Yeah.
and see if I can allow that regulation to happen.
Mm.
Mother who's already fearful,
Mm.
then you go and intervene with her
Mm.
by giving her a Pitocin
Mm.
and adding some more additional intervention to her.
Mm.
Then the body goes into an uncontrolled environment.
Yeah.
Like it really can't control, because if the drug goes into you, whether what you want or what you want, it does not matter.
Mm.
The body is taken over. It's
Mm.
hijacked in a way.
Mm.
So the body is hijacked by the pharmaceutical products.
Mm.
So then you can't really prevent anything that happens. It's a cascade after that, right? So how can I first allow the sensory regulation to happen,
Mm.
then the emotional regulation to happen? Once that is done, I do something called an invitation.
Mm.
I don't suggest yet.
Mm.
I do an invitation. And I'll tell you how I do this with the babies, okay? Now, this is why, because I have case scenarios of babies
Mm.
where I have to take them for a procedure. How do I do it with them? Now, first is, then I do that and then come to the suggestion part of it.
Mm.
So, these are the 4 different components that I use, right?
Okay.
So, the first is what? Sensory. How do I get this baby who's already probably traumatized during birth and come to a scenario where I also need to put this baby through another procedure,
Mm.
right? I have to prepare the body for that, right? So what do I do is, before I touch the baby,
Mm.
I allow the baby to feel the environment,
Mm.
to be settled in the environment,
Mm.
allow the safety regulation to happen in the environment,
Mm.
where nothing jarring is happening,
Mm.
too much, too quick, too little time to process is not occurring.
Right.
So that's something that's very important.
Mm.
So I don't touch that baby
Mm.
for long periods of time when the baby is coming. Unless there's absolutely a scenario where the baby needs to feed. That's a different scenario.
Mm.
But normally, you're not interacting with the baby first.
Mm.
Let the mother continue to interact with the baby.
Mm.
You keep empowering the mother to facilitate the process.
Mm.
And very often, even positioning wise, I I help the mother to see what I'm doing with a doll, for example,
Okay.
rather than me taking that baby and facilitating it,
Okay.
unless there's a requirement for it, right?
Mm.
So this is how we create sense of safety.
Right.
So the baby is not being intervened by a third person. That's first thing. Second, when I'm doing an assessment for the baby, I don't use my fingers directly into the mouth area or the face area, because that's going to be again a very jarring kind of a stimulation and overstimulating the baby who is already gone through so much.
Yeah.
Especially the baby's gone through NICU admissions,
Vacuum.
garbage feeding, which is like tube feeding through the nose, through the throat, and so imagine all these things that have occurred there.
Yeah.
And an environment that is completely alien to the baby. And most of the NICU babies don't even have a covering on top of them. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
They are completely open, completely naked almost, to a point that they're just wearing a diaper. And they're just in an open environment. That imagine what all environmental factors that are playing there. So how do I do that then? I stand next to the baby, allow the baby to become comfortable. Then I introduce the touch in a very gentle way in closer to the baby's hands. And most babies will pick the hand up and they start to go towards the mouth. That's their natural response. They do this, right? They move around. So they go. So you let them feel you. You let them interact with you. You let them introduce themselves to you.
Okay.
So this is what I call the invitation process.
Okay.
You allow that process to occur very naturally.
Yeah.
It's time to be given to get used to it. Then the babies naturally pick the hand up, usually for a little older baby, 3-6 weeks babies. They take that closer to their mouth. That means they're already inviting you to come closer. That's when it is now safer for me to say, okay, can I now suggest something? I move from invitation to suggestion. And now I'm looking into the mouth, still talking to the baby, saying thank you for the cooperation. You are allowing me to go look into the mouth. I know it's going to be uncomfortable for you, but let's look at it and we need to support you. We are going to do this only because we need to see how we can facilitate you better, because you can do this and somewhere you're finding it challenging. We're going to help you overcome the challenge. All this is happening while we are doing all of that. Now this is going through the process of settling down the sensory system, the emotional system, where the baby is not with the mother and it's with me, and the mother is dysregulated, so the baby doesn't even have an emotional framework to even operate, basically. Very distressed, right? The third is my invitation and then my suggestion.
Right.
So all of this integrated together,
Yeah.
you see this is called the priming. This is before procedures. Now, after I have finished doing the assessment, which is the suggestion part of it, you go back to revisiting the trust factor. Now, to an extent, there has been a little bit of an uncomfortable zone while we are doing the procedure, right? Now, after that, I have lost a bit of trust with my environment. You can't do anything about it because there is a process happening. So, as soon as that has happened, the last step which people never look at, which is so important, which I think I integrate that deeply into the work that I do, is to revisit and rebuild the trust back again. And how do I do that? I go back and give the baby again an invitation to wait and see if the baby will take back my hands and say, I am okay with you now. That's the closure part of it.
Right.
You have to go back to that place where you have learned to trust me back again. Otherwise, what happens is you want to run away from the situation. Now it's done and over. I'm no more available for you. I have to recreate that trust factor back.
Right.
And that is a very important step that we do pre. Now, pre and then during that process and then after the process.
Okay.
Now, if people have already gone through trauma, then being trauma informed means first understanding what is trauma, what are the signs of trauma, what can cause trauma, how does it look in their behavior, how does it look in their body postures, how does it look in the facial expressions, how does it look in their eye expressions, how does it look like in their words. All of these things have to be a part of your education to understand about trauma-informed care.
Okay.
That's the first step, because I could be reinitiating or introducing new trauma into my own reaction.
Re-traumatizing the person.
Re-traumatizing, which is what the case happens, because I remember as a young mother, I've already gone through a process of fertility.
Mm.
Fertility was natural, but pregnancy was very medicalized
Mm.
because I needed that care.
Mm.
After 3 miscarriages, there was need for giving injection, progesterone to sustain the pregnancy. All of that happened.
Mm.
So I've gone through a process and I've gone through a cesarean section, which was disorienting for me, even though it was a prepared scenario, right? Some cognitively, I know I'm going to do it. So it's the elective cesarean.
Mm.
Even then, my body felt dissociated.
Okay.
And then after that comes the event where the nurse walks into the room
Mm.
and she's trying to latch this baby.
Mm.
And I'm completely disconnected.
Mm.
I'm not intuitively moving with the baby
Mm.
because of the disconnection that has occurred.
Okay.
And she is trying to latch the baby and she's forcing this baby to go to the breast.
Mm.
The baby is howling,
Mm.
resisting, moving away. It's a scene that I cannot revisit many times. It's taken me a long time to heal that the whole event and the experience and to see it in an objective contextualized way. That's an uninformed trauma care.
Hmm. Yeah.
She never took anything into consideration.
Yeah.
And traumatized to such an extent that just by that pushing of the baby, because the baby has some stiffnesses in the body, the baby couldn't move to the other breast.
Mm.
She refused to attach to that breast completely for the next few years of her nursing journey.
Oh.
She never went back.
Ma'am, but these things, I wanted to interrupt you many a times because I kept revisiting my lactation practice, what clients kept telling me, what stories I heard, my own experiences, all of that. Here, I wish to say, things like one-sided feeding and all is normalized to such an extent that it is called, okay, it's okay if the child is feeding only on one side, it's fine, just continue without entering into these domains, right?
Yes.
So, ma'am, you did mention some of the ways in which birth trauma in the mother or especially in the baby, how is it manifesting into lactation issues? One small portion that I feel so many people do not explore is postpartum. How birth trauma is affecting postpartum also, because otherwise, whichever postpartum related discussions I see, they talk about hormonal imbalances. That is a cause. They say it's as a cause. So, immediate postpartum, what all a mother can observe, I think from the lactation-oriented manifestations itself, they would have probably got an idea. If the breastfeeding hadn't gone well or if there were issues in bonding with the baby itself, you told, yes, these are all signs and symptoms that trauma is there. Now, considering a woman has given birth some 8 years back, how will she realize if she has, obviously she knows, the most deeper part of her probably knows.
Yeah.
But what are some of the signs and symptoms that later we can identify?
So, to put it into context, Swati, I think what is important is to know is she may not know, but she can sense something, right? It's a sensory experience.
Yeah.
So, therefore, she may not know about contextualizing it or recognizing it, or she feels troubled with it, but she doesn't know what to do with it. Is there anything that needs to be done also? So, all of this are the event has happened so long ago. What are we going to do about it? Will it ever have a repercussion now? These are things that we can explore, right? So, I think what is important to recognize is that everything that happens during the pregnancy, labor, birth, and postpartum, they all have this imprints in us. They leave an experiential imprint in us.
Okay.
Which will play a role throughout lifetime.
Okay.
In different ways. How? Right? As soon as the baby is born, and is starting from the utero I'm talking about, we have approximately 12 different primitive reflexes in our body. That's why they're called primitive reflexes. They're very primitive in nature. What they mean is that these are all mechanisms that are in our body, which are already programmed so that it can be like an alarm system or a survival mechanisms that allows us to find safety. Right? So, like for example, something sudden things are happening, the baby will show you a startle reflex. Goes like that. But you say, is that supposed to be like trauma? No, it's not trauma. There's a natural response in the body.
Yeah.
And that startled reflex, for example, allows you to take the first breath. Baby comes out and baby startles, takes the breath. You see? So that's how it supports you. It supports you to find safety. It supports you to survive. It helps you to move to the mother's breast and get the nourishment that you require. It's a way of using a sort of body language in a way to communicate with our caregivers, right? You have a walking reflex,
Yeah.
you have the startle reflex, you have a tonic neck reflex. You have other reflexes which have a slightly different names that I don't remember as of now. But there are many different reflexes this way, right? Now, these reflexes mostly integrate rooting reflex. You might say rooting reflex, you see the baby looking for the breast. Will turn towards the head. If you touch the sheet, the baby turns like that, looks for the feed, right? You will never know what it actually does later on in life. I'll just tell you about it, okay? So all these reflexes support us for our best survival chances. Gives you the best chance to survive. Now, they all get integrated, which means they emerge at a certain point in the utero or at birth or a little later, and they all get integrated between 3 and 4 months, and some at between 9 and 10 months within the first year, and some of them go up to 2 years, and one of them goes up to 3.5 years. I'm saying that all of them integrate between 3 and 4 months, between 9 and 10 months within the first year.
Yeah.
Some go up to say about 12 to 24 months. Within first 2 years, majority of them get integrated, right? Which means no more they are required. They're all integrated into the system. Now, one of them lasts up to 3.5 years also, which is basically moving the head forward and backward. It's interesting, isn't it? The head, the neck stability, that reflex continues to be primitive till 3 to 3.5 years, Swati. It's one of the later reflexes that get fully integrated. Now, all these reflexes are meant to help us survive, best chance for survival, right? Now, if they don't get integrated, and why they don't get integrated, it's the connection with the trauma of the events that have occurred. Right? So, they continue to be as a part of your physiology and move into your childhood and move into your adulthood. Right? So, they all will continue. Now, I'll give you an example of it. The rooting reflex is supposed to give us the sense of our external validation, connecting with the mother. So, it's the reflex of the connection. Think about it now. Okay. So, if I don't get that maternal connection in my life, for whatever reasons that have occurred, and if it runs into me not having the chance to have mother feeding experience, and then I was bottle fed, then I moved into the childhood, then how will it play out the role there? They will start to need something in the mouth, such as, for example, thumb sucking, for example, using something in the mouth, or using substance abuse, smoking. All of these things come later on. And what does it mean? It means that your rooting reflex hasn't completely got integrated. It just transformed into a behavioral issue. Something else is happening there, seeking that connection. That's what is occurring there, right? So, like this, you see different things. For example, I told you about a symmetrical tonic neck reflex, which is basically moving your head side to side, right? It helps you to reach out to mother's breast this side, mother's breast this side. It allows feeding. Now, interestingly, what does it actually play a role later on? If it's not fully integrated, what you're going to experience is inability to be able to see different perceptions. Right? This is a perception and this is a perception. So, I'm willing to see different perceptions in life. And people like that can find very difficult to understand and empathize with your perspective, for example. That can be a reflex that can stay on. So, any traumatic event that occurs in life, even at an adulthood, you can re-emerge those survival mechanisms back again. And very often this is not explored at all. Even in therapeutics, it is not explored, Swati. So, it will all come back again, right? So, then if I don't recognize it, I'm going to see it as a behavior issue. Right? When that behavioral issue comes at a later stage, like 8 years, your mother knows that something has occurred. What has occurred? The child doesn't listen to her. the child does not connect with her, the child is having aggression behavior, the child is having a disconnection from the environment, maybe be feeling a bit isolated or being hyper emotional about everything that occurs in the child's life, or having learning difficulties, for example, or the child is having hand-eye coordination problems, different kinds of learning experiences that can happen, right? All of
Eating issues.
eating issues, absolutely, absolutely. So that reflex that you see, the sucking reflex, which I was talking about. Now, if that gets elicited again, when I say elicited, you're re-triggering that process of that primitive reflex back into your system because of very traumatic events that have happened. Such as a mother who's gone through a traumatic event, her sucking reflex, which is converted into her sense of safety, is actually altered. Then what will she do? She will start to overeat, or she will start to seek for foods that gives her comfort. So she will look for comfort foods, and sometimes that can be like her emotional regulation is connected with her food
Emotionally
basically. And a lot of people do that, right?
Yeah.
So all of these food issues, all of these things you will get to see at a later stage. So at 8 years, what are you going to see? You're going to see social connection, relational issues, that I can't integrate with my friends.
Right.
I'm always sensitive. I'm all the time crying. I'm whining. I don't like what's happening in my life, or I'm overly trying to please people.
Yeah.
Right? That's to do with your rooting reflex, external validation. So if that is not safeguarded, you're going to do validation from outside, seeking validation, or become a people pleaser. Sort of that event starts to come. So this mother is confused, doesn't know what to do with this behavior, and she constantly wants to counsel it, or maybe get counselors to talk to the child, or her relational field with the child is not connected in a way that she is able to, guide the child in a certain way. All these issues will show up.
So, ma'am, do you think now that we are talking about it, a mom who has an 8-year-old or 9-year-old will be able to connect the dots and probably
I hope so.
Definitely,
I
right?
hope so. And she says, okay, this is what's happening. Now, recently I had a mother who was talking about a compulsive behavior pattern of a child who's all the time lying,
Oh my God.
right? So she finds fascinating stories about what has not occurred in the life, and then she keeps talking about it to her friends.
Like stories means stuff
She'll
that has
make
never
up
happened.
never
Okay.
happened at home.
Okay.
It doesn't even exist.
Hmm.
She will go and tell her friends that these things are happening.
Hmm.
And it's not I'm not talking about a preschooler or a 3 or 4-year-old who's having imagination, for example.
Okay.
I'm talking about an older child. An older child finding ways to give stories that never really occurred, and is not actually telling the friends that I'm fantasizing a story. She talks about it like as if they actually are occurring in her life.
Okay.
And she can give you details like almost nobody can question you.
Okay.
But this can be a great writer, I would say,
Yeah.
but that's a serious problem. And so the relational field between the mother and child becomes worse and worse because there is no way to bring back this child to be able to be in a safer boundary of parenting, where the child is guided or listening to be guided also. Because the child is a little older child, will do whatever they feel like doing. But this is what my reality is.
Okay.
So if they do that way, parents are confused. They are trying to get the best in terms of the parenting education, for example, but they don't have answers to this, or they will possibly put this child under some psychiatrist, some medications perhaps, or maybe get the child counseled, and perhaps the child will never open up anywhere. So all these things can occur. So we do need to look at the neurobiology. We need to look at the physiology. We also need to look at what has occurred during their lifetime, especially during the birthing process, and then see what happens with the responses that they are doing and how am I coping with it. My behaviors are what, Swati? They are all my coping mechanisms in life.
Yeah.
Isn't it? So if I'm doing this, which is disruptive socially, then first thing you need to look at is how can we support this child? Instead of isolating the child, instead of demonizing the child, labeling the child, or negating the child, or dismissing the child, or almost coming to a point of prophesizing that the life is to be doomed, you're coming to a point you can't do anything about this child. We do need to look at and go back to all of these. And that's why I feel like Anybody who is in the mental health space, anybody who is there in a medical field, anybody who's there in a caregiving space, including parents socially, I'm saying,
Yeah.
everybody needs to understand how to empathize with these situations.
Okay, I'm getting there, man. I'm getting there.
Exactly.
But before that, I wish to let you explain to the public what you do in terms of BCST, which I feel is a fascinating modality. First time I'm coming across the terminology, the process, the therapy, everything was with you. I was fascinated, to say the least, when I experienced it first time. And anybody who's experienced it would know how these babies calm down with you just like that and go to the breast. And the mother gives me a call. They're like, Swati, what did Yasmin ma'am just do? My baby is just feeding without any problems. So we even did an Insta live few years back, 4 to 5 years back, called The Magic Touch. And that still resonates among a lot of my old followers, how they felt really moved listening to that conversation. Can you let our audience know what is BCST, biodynamic craniocycle therapy, and how it can help for trauma resolution?
So, most of the modalities, let me clarify what modalities mean, right? You're choosing a certain technique or a set of processes that we put together for a therapeutic setup. Treatment protocol, you can say. You can call it as a treatment protocol. So, modalities are different kinds of modalities you'll find. You'll find medication is a modality. You're choosing to give medication for a particular situation, which is biochemical in nature, right? Or you could do, for example, physiotherapy. It's about working with the muscles, right? Then you have acupressure, acupuncture. You have certain points in the body that are confluences of coherence or attunement in the body, and they stimulate those areas. So either with a pressure or with a needle. So these are all different modalities that you can work with, right? Now there are many other modalities. Now, given from that angle, those are all suggestive modalities, which I call it as suggestive modalities. Why do I call it suggestive? We look at an issue, we evaluate it, sometimes we diagnose those situations, and then we choose, okay, this is what I need to do. If this particular muscle is not working, this exercise is going to help this muscle particularly move.
Right.
That's the approach, which I call it suggestive method. I am telling the body what to do, or I am facilitating what to do for the body. Now, I want you to understand, what do we do as biodynamic, right? We don't do suggestive process. We do supportive process.
Okay.
Right? Which means that I support something called an inherent treatment plan. And then I'll tell you what BCST is, and then I'll tell you what inherent treatment plan is. First, for us to know the difference between this modality and all other modalities is very different. That's why it fascinated you to see, because the approach itself is different, right? The approach is of support rather than to fix things. Both are necessary, but this is a different approach towards it. Now, we have a nervous system. The nervous system has two main branches, which one is called the sympathetic branch and one is called the parasympathetic branch, right? Now, most people know about this. Now, what these do is to, one, stimulate you to get into action, and the other one actually does rest and digest. That allows you to reset itself. So, both of them work hand in hand, which actually you can see very beautifully in a heartbeat. Right? When you see an ECG, you see an upward spike and then the downward one, an upward one and downward one. So that spikes that you see is a sympathetic charge, and the one that goes lower is actually a parasympathetic response.
Right.
So they both need to be in balance. Now, when they are not in balance, you're going to know that you are going to be overly charged. It's going to be like an erratic kind of an heartbeat that you see, right? So that's what occurs when one is not balanced or the other is not balanced.
Right.
Now, is it always the sympathetic that is overcharged and nothing to do with parasympathetic? No, Swati, that's not true. You can also have heightened parasympathetic response, which is complete frozen state.
Yeah.
shut down, which we
Mhm.
talked about, a baby
Yeah,
being
yeah.
completely shut down.
Mm.
That baby doesn't have the sympathetic response, which is overcharged.
Mm.
That baby is actually having an overcharge of parasympathetic response. So you need to give the other ones to balance for them to get awakened to
Mhm.
come back and do what they have to do.
Mhm.
This you will relate with even adults
Mm.
who can't handle a situation. They feel overwhelmed. They disconnect and
Yeah.
completely go into shell.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's so, and then you can also relate with people who have a lot of procrastination issues.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
they are basically in that parasympathetic system,
Yeah.
complete shutdown state. They
Mm.
can't manage anything in life. So this is how the imbalance can happen.
Mm.
So we need to get this into balance, right? Now the body physiologically is primed and it knows how to always keep it in balance.
Mm.
That's how the body mechanism itself is.
Right.
Like every organism,
Mm.
you see your single celled organism to multiple cell organisms or complex organisms, you will see self-regulation happening, regulation within its own system,
Okay.
right?
Mm.
They are dependent on the outside environment,
Mm.
but they are regulated within.
Mm.
Every cell regulates itself.
Mm.
So that regulation process occurs, right? Now, what we do in our therapy is we provide the environment
Mm.
to allow that regulation, which is inbuilt regulation system, biological inbuilt system,
Mm.
to get to working stage.
Okay. Okay.
That's what we do in biodynamic craniosacral therapy.
Mm. Mm.
And why is it called biodynamic? Why is it called craniosacral? I'll tell you. Where I talked about nervous system.
Mm.
So nervous system sits where? Inside the brain.
Mm.
So the brain inside the cranium,
Mm.
including your brain stem,
Mm.
then comes the medulla oblongata,
Mm.
and then the entire spinal canal,
Mm.
right down to your sacral area.
Mm.
This entire system is called the craniosacral system.
Mm.
So that is the entire nervous system,
Mm.
autonomous nervous system. The entire central nervous system is built into that system, right?
Mm.
That's what keeps the entire body in its balance.
Mm.
That is why the therapy is called craniosacral
Sacral
system.
Mm.
Now, what is biodynamic about it? Biodynamic is a relational field that we are facilitating that process
Mm.
to allow the craniosacral system
Mm.
to regulate.
Mm.
This is what we do in a relational field.
Okay.
That's why it's called biodynamic. So earlier, where did it come from? It came from a modality called osteopathy,
Mm-hmm.
which is the study of the relational bones,
Mm-hmm.
bones in the body, how they interact with it, not orthodontic.
Mm.
I'm talking about osteopathy,
Mm.
adjustments in the bone that allows circulation to occur in the body.
Mm.
And this is a proper science in the US,
Mm.
which we have doctors who are osteopathic doctors who do adjustments in the body. So they look at the body in that way. Now, later on, what Dr. Sutherland did, who was like one of the fathers of the therapeutic model, that he observed that while the craniosacral osteopathy is a part of it, what he noticed that even without too much of manual adjustments, something is occurring in the body which I can facilitate with a very gentle touch without manipulating it. Like a physiotherapy is moving the muscle.
Yeah.
Like that, osteopaths move the bones, for example. But he noticed that you can do even without it. And as they moved into the subtle rhythms of the body, they came to a point where they said with a gentle touch in a relational field, you can actually allow the expansion to occur, circulation to improve, and you're going to see, which I call, which I mentioned to you earlier, the inherent treatment plan to get elicited.
Okay.
You're not doing a treatment plan from outside, but you are doing something already present inside the body to allow that healing process to occur, which is what we do in a craniosacral system. Now, how do you do it if you ask me? We do it with gentle hands. That's called the listening hands. There is a beautiful book which is also called the listening hand.
I'll show some pictures here on the screen. Yeah.
Yes. So it's called the listening hands. So you're training your hands to have perception. Perceptual senses are heightened, allowed to be educated with a lot of background information and understanding and knowledge about cranial anatomy,
Mm.
whole body anatomy, physiology,
Mm.
understanding about the bones, how they basically shaped,
Mm.
how they actually develop during embryo,
Mm.
what the entire detailed understanding of the embryology,
Mm.
and then how does the regulation happen inside the body,
Mm.
how does the nervous system respond,
Mm.
how does it actually function. All of this is deeply studied.
Okay. All this is there, ma'am, but for a person who is watching the whole thing unfold, it's magic.
Yeah, correct. Because it's
Magic.
happening with a gentle touch,
Yeah.
right? And that's the beautiful part of it. So
Mm.
all of us in some form
Mm.
are at a base level craniosacral therapist only. Like a mother who is in touch with a baby, she is actually creating the same response in the right? But when do you need a therapist?
Mm.
You need a therapist when the relational field has been disrupted.
Mm. Okay.
So because your nervous system is also disrupted,
Yeah.
baby's system is also disrupted. Now you cannot facilitate that process for the baby.
Mm.
That's when you need an external help
Right.
to help you regulate and to help baby regulate.
Right.
So that both of you are in a regulated state, then
Mm.
you both are in a place where you can continue together.
Yeah.
So that the relationship, the relational field that is very important for us,
Mm.
it cannot be disrupted. If
Okay.
that is what we facilitate, Swati.
Okay.
And at a physiological level, we facilitate it.
Okay.
What happens in the body when you do the therapy is,
Mm.
when you're deeply listening, right? Just
Mm.
like you're listening to me, acknowledgement like a counselor, you do counseling, right? So from a psychological perspective, what do? When you counsel somebody, you acknowledge them, you
Mm.
hear them, you deeply acknowledge them, you validate them, their experiences.
Mm.
So as you do that,
Mm.
some spaces of experiences open up inside you.
Yeah.
And what does it do? Physiologically, it
Mm.
allows pathways
Mm.
for better circulation to occur.
Mm.
That's how real healing happens,
Mm.
right? So that is at a cognitive level.
Mm.
Now, if you move to the physiological level,
Mm.
this is how we facilitate the inner spaces to open,
Okay. Okay.
right?
Mm.
So the tissues open up,
Mm.
they expand, and whatever is innervating between them, which
Mm.
can be nerves,
Mm.
which can be venous system,
Mm.
it can be a lymphatic system, it
Mm.
can be the nervous, signals that are going,
Mm.
electrical signals that are going in. They can be between the cells. There are intracellular spaces.
Mm.
Then there are exchange of the fluids between the cells, exchange of the fluids from between the brain and the rest of the body. So many things that are occurring inside. You are facilitating that to open up when you allow the fascial system in the body
Mm.
to relax, to open up, to receive what
Right.
is to come, which is the biological force. In our work, we call it as a primary respiration.
Okay. Okay.
Your heartbeat and your lung,
Mm.
which has its own rhythm,
Mm.
right? The heartbeat beats around
Mm.
72 times approximately. And your breath is about 12 to 14 breaths in a minute.
Mm.
That's how it is. We understand this to be a rhythm.
Okay.
Now, what we don't realize is beyond these rhythms, which we know,
Mm.
there are also other rhythms in the body that we don't know.
Mm.
Like the cerebrospinal fluid, which is inside the brain, which is a liquid,
Mm.
which circulates inside the brain and the entire craniosacral system,
Right.
also has a rhythm of its own,
Mm.
right? We don't really look at that. That's called the cranial rhythmic impulse,
Mm.
which is CRI. It's called the CRI. There are also other subtle rhythms in the body, which is not completely related with the heartbeat and the lungs.
Mm.
It is a rhythm of its own, another rhythm, which is much slower in pace.
Okay.
And you go in concentric circles, Swati. We go to an extent where there is this breath that the entire universe is breathing.
Mm.
Very slowly, everything is breathing. And that's why everything is alive in this universe. Everything's alive in this universe,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Nothing is without it. In fact, recently I saw a reel
Mm.
where they were showing the inner nerves of a tooth.
Mm.
We often never look at it that way.
Mm.
The tooth is a bone. It's a hard bone.
Mm.
And maybe the nerve goes and there's a connection to that.
Mm.
But when we actually chip off that enamel outside
Mm.
and look at the nerves inside,
Mm.
it has a beat of its own.
Mm.
It was so fascinating to see that.
Yeah.
That it's not just a nerve that passes some electrical signals. It has life that actually beats. You see? So everything breathes
Mm. Mm.
around us with life.
Yeah.
And that's called the primary respiration. And that needs to pass through our body and energizes the body, vitalizes the body, and gives us the resources to live and not just survive in our life, but also thrive in our life. And sometimes that would disrupt it. We only look at the heartbeat saying, oh, that's okay. All the vitals are fine. Temperature is fine. Oxygenation is fine. The breathing is all fine. We look at only these things. In our work, we call this a secondary respiratory system. The primary system is not any of these.
Okay, it's a much more subtler.
Much more subtler forces are working. And that subtler forces have to be free, be energizing
The whole body. Yeah.
That's called the microcirculation. They need to circulate to every little part of your body. That's not happening. And that causes internal dehydration, tissue death, and organ system to start to decay.
Right.
This can be understood for anything you do, not just with babies, but everything. So these babies start to respond. How do they look at it? Like you mentioned, right? They start to feed better. But that's not the only thing, Swati. You get to see them. First thing their response is they start to become happier.
Yeah. I've seen before after photos of those
They
babies.
just become happy.
Before they're so grumpy and
that
tight.
frowning,
So, yeah,
they are angry,
Here and all,
they are like all tight, they're holding their hands so tight, their toes are curling. So all these are reflexes that are showing heightened reflexes that they have. So when we do the therapeutic work, they start to subtly go into a space that allows them, oh, I can live in this body. This is a nice space. Can I explore something better? So all this happens. They start to have a smile. I'm talking about a 2-month-old baby. Immediately start to smile. The head shape changes, Swati. Very big thing for you to look at. We feel like sometimes it's not, mothers worry about it, but I don't think they think of it as an issue, right? So you see the head shape starts to happen, change. The stiffness in the body starts to
absolutely
relax.
That's very evident. Yeah.
Very, very evident.
Like when you pick the baby itself, it's very evident.
Would.
Yeah, otherwise now they are like all happy.
They're just happy. They're moving about. So all that is happening. Plus then they start to vomit less. They sleep better. They feed better. They bond better. They're
not gassy anymore. They're not constipated anymore.
They're not. All these physiological responses, you get to see them.
Yeah.
But mothers also see subtler things. For example, the position of the way the baby sleeps. They'll share pictures where the baby's completely gone like backseat.
Like this.
Backseat, arching a different way totally, or sleeping on their
tummy.
Tummy, like, crunch themselves up. The bum is right up. They're sleeping in a very awkward position, not making an eye contact, not happy at all, constantly being whiny, crying, waking up several times in the night. So all these things have to be looked at, especially sleep, Swati. The first thing the craniosacral system the result you see is the sleep starts to regulate. Because that's our healing system in the body. So if you allow sleep to get regulated, you're actually engaging with the best system in the body that can heal. It will start to do its own work. Because the rest has happened, right? So it allows that to settle down.
Right.
But also, like I told you, don't look at the disruption of the sleep. We are also looking oversleeping. Babies who go into sleep and they won't wake up, Swati. Sometimes 4 hours have passed, sometimes 6 hours have passed, the baby hasn't got up, not showing any signs of hunger. It's a part of the primitive reflex that is not integrated well.
Right.
So these babies need support. So you allow a system to get vitalized, not just to be resting, but also the other way around, to be energized. You can also support the system to get energized. And then you see them being awake, they are able to show the cues of hunger, they are able to feed better, they are going to respond better, they are more alert, they are more social. All these things you get to start to see them.
Right. Ma'am, I think it can actually go on. If you go into one word, you can talk about that for 1 hour, and then another word, you can talk about it for an hour. So I think for baby itself, we'll have to do a separate thing. And I really wish pediatricians get to watch, things like this, so that, they get to see these other worlds that mothers are exploring. Because in desperation, these are the things that they do, they try out and then they're happy and they're like, why didn't nobody tell me this? Oh, somebody should have told me that space and all this. So many
The
people get it.
beautiful part is the mothers do a lot of things intuitively. I'll tell you how they do that. They do the rocking, they do the shushing, and they walk with the baby, and they wear their babies.
Yeah.
All these are parts of regulation. Or the traditional jhula that we have. All these are parts of craniosacral system only. Because the vestibular, which is the inner ear balance that you require, that allows the central nervous system to actually regulate better, which is what happens when you swing. And the same, and that is why it concerns me, Swati, because we have people who probably are giving the message to the parents that don't use these systems, that traditional knowledge and wisdom that we already have. You're using this system of a swing method for a child who has autism. We have recreated the same thing as a complete modality of therapy.
Okay.
And when the mothers are naturally doing that and being passed down as traditional wisdom in the house, we are discouraging those mothers to do that. Right? What we are actually talking is, do not get associated with one method so that it becomes disrupted in your life, because they get habituated about it. We are all products of habit, right? We are habit creatures only, we are all habit creatures. You just need the right kind of conditioning, that's all. So instead of giving that message to the parents that don't engage in these activities because they are outdated or they don't have any reference point or they don't have evidence, I have to tell the audiences there is absolutely new research that's coming out that tells them that these are all absolutely validated. Right? When you're overusing it and underusing it is a different matter. But it is something that is beneficial for parents.
Right.
How do you survive where you don't have therapies or even recognize that the child requires therapy? This is how we lived life. You think this disruption didn't happen before? It always happened. To some extent it happened. Not to the extent that we had. But all of them managed like this only because they all knew how to do these things. The white noise allows the settling to happen. When a baby is not attaching to the breast, what do? I make the mother walk, which is movement therapy. Then I start the swooshing process where she is combining the white noise with the movement and then calm the sensory system by reducing lights, drawing the curtains. So all the sensory systems that need to go out and deal with what's happening, it's all calming down. I've removed all the stimulus. So the child goes into a reserve state, uses the inner engagement, basically using the reserve resources at that point. The baby uses to remember, okay, I can attach, I can do this, I don't have too many things to deal with. So it becomes easier for the baby to latch. You see, what are you doing? You're facilitating it, right? So you're not removing anything. You're actually integrating that work.
Right.
That's a part of it, Swati. So I think we do disservice to mothers when we do not speak from the place of an evidence. Right? Everything cannot be sold as an idea of a concept. It needs to be based out of truth.
Right.
Then whenever they think back also, they will understand, okay, this was the meaning of that. We invalidate things very quickly without realizing it, and then we reintroduce it in some other form.
So I want a lot of professionals to actually work with people like you, create these multidisciplinary, approaches to things and think out of the box and not be restricted to their own fields, and probably join hands with such professionals so that we can get better care to mums and babies and baby mother dyads.
Sure.
So I'm seeing a lot of people open up,
Yes,
which is a great thing. A lot of young doctors, very curious doctors, keep asking me, ma'am, what were you talking about? How is that working? Whom should we approach? Who is Yasmin? What is this? And all I have experienced that also. So I'm seeing a lot of young professionals, care providers wanting to know mental health. That itself is a new thing that I'm seeing. Mind body connected. So we can't see the disease as a disease itself. We have to look into other aspects also. That and all I'm seeing. What are your words of advice or suggestion to young medical professionals, probably medical students, psychologists, social, people who do social work, people who are interacting with mums, babies, how can they approach all these things in a better way, ma'am?
In the better way. I
Yeah.
think even without getting into knowing a certain modality like a
Mm.
BCST or an craniosacral therapy, it's not
Mm.
necessary that everybody has to do that, right?
Okay.
What we can integrate is
Mm.
each one in their own fields
Mm.
of their own modalities of work,
Okay.
whatever they are doing,
Mm.
they can start to integrate an understanding of the trauma, first of all.
Mm.
So we do have courses that sensitizes the medical professionals
Okay.
and counselors and caregivers and
Okay.
care providers
Okay.
to know what is trauma-informed care. Just understanding that
That is
itself is sufficient. Now,
right.
I use to just say that by default lactation consultants will know it, by default birth workers will know it. Not necessary.
No.
Not at all. It's not necessary.
No.
Right? So everyone needs to be trauma informed.
Yeah.
Why do they have to be trauma informed? Because there is prevalence of trauma. We know the research is telling us that. So more than 50% of mothers are experiencing traumatic birth. This is what the research is telling us. So then that means we need to be informed about it. We need to know what are the signs of it, how to approach them, how do I hold space for them as a care provider, how do I do what I have to do, like a gynecologist who has to do pelvic exam, for example, right? So how is she going to do it unless she understands what is trauma informed care?
Yeah.
Right? So that's being sensitive about it. So if you really want to move to more of excellence in your own modalities of work, in your own field of work, I think just integrating trauma-informed care itself is a game changer, Swati.
Okay. You have a course that you are giving our medical professionals open to.
Yes. So we do have master classes for
Okay,
that,
okay,
which introduces the concept of what is trauma-informed
And how they can
how they can apply that. So the basic framework is given to them
Okay.
and they can gain knowledge over that and then start to integrate them within their own fields of work that they do. Because it's a separate module that can go into anything. You can plug it into anything.
Yeah.
Because you can't really bring everyone to a certain modality. No, that's not possible.
Okay.
Each one will do what they have to do. So in their fields, how do I integrate that? So yes, we can support them to understand, and it can be any professional who wants to understand what is trauma.
Okay.
How do I understand trauma? What is the causes of it? What are the signs of it? And what is a supportive way of approaching them?
Okay.
So if we integrate that, that includes even psychologists.
Yeah.
Or a psychiatrist, for example.
Yeah.
Not necessarily they are trauma informed. While they must know what is trauma, but not necessarily they understand.
The level of understanding is not there.
Not there.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Everything is
that
not there.
sets them apart. That sets them apart.
Yeah.
And I think the community benefits from that, Swati.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. So resources wise, people can reach out to nourishandnurture.in.
Yes.
And there are courses.
Yes.
And I guess for lactation also.
Yes, for lactation.
Courses are there.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
For just understanding what is trauma-informed care or understanding the framework behind it, what are the principles behind approaching, all of that we can facilitate them through master classes.
Right. So thank you so much, ma'am. I think we have to have more episodes on each one of those topics that we just touched today. I think babies itself can be a topic for a day. It will help a lot of mothers and fathers. And you speak so passionately about how relationships can work beautifully with the mother and the father playing their roles really well. And about parenting. So I want you to talk about all those things on
as we go on.
Stories. So many more stories from you.
So many more Maya's Amma stories.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Guys, I hope you enjoyed. Please do let me know what you feel, what you think about this episode, because this is something completely out of my usual thing that I have been doing. I am going to introduce more of these unique professionals and these varied fields of work that's going to help our community in one way or the other. So please stay tuned and hit subscribe button also. Thank you so much for watching. A lot of love, lot of healing from me and Yasmin ma'am. Bye.